Amitabh,
Thanks. Thank you.
diving in and straight away, given the theme that we're exploring is the ambition to create $1 trillion digital economy, and when I think about it, it almost seems like there are three parts to it, at least in my mind. There's one, how do we think about building up the technical talent in India, especially around engineers? The second is all of the work around building the right domestic environment for innovation. And then third, how we engage with the world. I'm wondering, how do you think about it on each of these three? Or is there a different framework that you bring in when you're driving the thinking about the $1 trillion digital economy at NITI?
Yeah. So Ajit, firstly, that we have over a billion, half a billion internet users, and their number is rising rapidly in every part of the country. And this will create a huge market for a host of digital services, platforms, application, content, and solutions. And my view is that as we move towards increasing use through regional languages, India would see a five-fold increase in economic value from digital transformation by 2025. And this represents a very, very huge opportunity for both global and local businesses, startups, and innovators. Uh, Particularly in emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, in ways that are customized to India's needs. But one thing is very clear that, India needs many more people with specialized background of, uh, artificial intelligence. We need many more data scientists. We have a lot of engineers. It's not that there is a shortage of engineers, but you need great, product designers. There's a huge shortage of great product designers, and there's a great shortage of data scientists. And therefore, my view is that Indian academic institutions need to restructure their curriculum to create, and this is a huge amount of focus needs to be laid on emerging areas of technology. Merely producing great number of electric and electronic engineers is not adequate. You need product designers, and therefore, and that is where great amount of value can be created. And I think each one of our institutions need to really do work around this. And my view is that India can actually create up to a trillion, 1 trillion of economic value from digital economy by 2025, up from around 200 billion currently. And we have a huge potential in a whole range of areas. Secondly, I think the other big challenge is really that India has vast number of challenges, and these challenges are relating to our national priorities such as healthcare, education, energy, and about doubling farmers' income. Uh, because these are challenges which no other country faces what India faces. Our engineers and our scientists must be able to find technology to find solutions to these challenges. And without technological leapfrogging, we'll not be able to find solutions. The traditional way of looking at things and doing things will not help. We need technology to leapfrog. And if we are able to do this, and actually, if you look at agriculture field, there are huge number of startups doing some very innovative work which needs to be taken forward. And if we are able to find solutions to our problems, we'll actually be finding solutions to the world's problems. So it's not about 1.3 billion people of India, but for next 5 or 6 billion people. And thirdly, my view is that fintech area is a huge area of explosion. That's an area because you have the Jam Trinity, you have the UPI, so you've created the basic platforms. And on top of this, you've allowed private sector to innovate and grow. So you have Google Pay, you have Phone Pay, you have Amazon Pay, you have Paytm, and India has allowed all these. Unlike China, we've allowed big companies to come in and we've allowed Indian players to come in. And Indian players are actually competing with the world's best today. And therefore, if I was just comparing the figure of Google Pay versus Phone Pay, and I found Phone Pay has done extremely well on UPI. Actually, it has done as a little better than Google Pay. So what it shows is that Indian entrepreneurs have taken on the world in this, and therefore these are my initial thoughts that once you, and now with this BharatNet spreading out into the rural areas of India, and Prime Minister saying that we'll cover all the rural villages in the next 1,000 days, once you have BharatNet across the rural areas, the technological transformation of India will happen through technology. I look after these aspirational districts, some of the most backward, the most difficult districts of India. And I find that when I visit them, I find that more than physical infrastructure of roads, they need internet connectivity, and that will help us to improve health and education outcomes in these areas.
You've always brought the conversation to the aspirational districts. Every time we have met Amitabh, I'm curious. You're engaged with a lot of entrepreneurs in the tech industry. How much energy are you seeing from the tech industry, as well as these entrepreneurs, in terms of focusing on the needs and opportunities of those aspirational districts?
Yeah, so the aspirational districts, as I said, cover about roughly 20% of India's population. They are some of the most backward, the most difficult district. But in the last 2.5 years, we've seen radical transformation. The key to that has been the use of one real-time data. When I was a collector in Kerala, in Calicut, the data available to me was about 5 to 6 years back. And later I worked with the fishermen, the traditional fishermen of Kerala, to introduce beach level auctions and new technology. They're opening a bank account for traditional, I could give them new outboard motors, give them new fishing crafts, fiberglass crafts, which enable them to go much further into the sea. I could give them new fishing nets. But opening a bank account was a nightmare. I used to run after bank managers. It used to know your customer, used to take 7 to 8 months then. But the real transformation that has happened in these aspirational districts also is that one is that real-time data is available, and secondly, you are able to get bank accounts have been opened for the people in these areas. So with bank accounts, you have today 135,000 crores lying in the bank accounts of these people in many of these areas of the new bank accounts that have opened. And therefore, what has happened is that today a woman has a bank account, she has some money in her account, and we've digitally enabled her. So that is the big thing that's happened in these aspirational districts. The other is that today you are able to use data to put out their ranking in public domain. You are able to say that this district has done well, this district has not done well, and you are able to challenge them. You can name and shame their performance. And once you start putting them in public domain, the state departments, the state chief ministers also notice it. And that is making a difference. And this, to my mind, is the key. The third thing is that we work with a lot of tech companies, and we work with a lot of good NGOs. We work with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We work with Piramal Trust. We work with Tata Trust, really to do innovative things in these areas on improving nutrition and health and education. And all of them have done transformational work. And several startups have done some very, very innovative work in these districts. In fact,
Okay.
we'd be very happy to showcase some of this unique work to your organization.
No, we would love to, and let's find a way to showcase those, Amitabh. You mentioned this. It feels like two big things happened in the last 5 years, Amitabh. One was the explosion in access to the internet. It happened in a very short period of time, where you have 700, 800 million people, and the number ticking up. And the second thing is, in the last few months, with the pandemic, it seems like there has been an acceleration of digital behavior. I can share with you that in the last 6 months, we are seeing across our platforms, Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, not just people's usage of the platforms, Amitabh, but businesses using them to be a lot more ambitious about growth, not just in India, but global growth in ways that was not true even 12 months ago. I'm curious whether you are seeing that as well, where you sit. And are you thinking now that with the combination of the two, we could be even more ambitious than we were even 12 months ago about the digital economy that can be built in India and in India for the world?
No, so that's a very, very important point that you're making, and it becomes so obvious if you look at the huge growth in UPI, for instance, the Unified Payment Interface. UPI has just grown many-fold during this period, and what I've seen is that India's digital divide is narrowing fast. During this period, we've been able to use technology across a range of areas. And the good thing that has happened is that India has also worked, and many of the startups have worked with us on seeing how the post-COVID era is going to change globally, and only those countries will grow which can create economic value from digital economy, and that is really the crux of it. So I think supply chains will get restructured. They will move from one country to many countries. You have to be competitive, and you can be competitive only if you use the power of technology. And that is one of the key things that we've done during this period, is not only that we've carried out radical structural reforms across a range of areas which the Prime Minister has led, across a whole range of areas, across coal, mining, definition of MSME, agriculture, many areas. But we've really focused on improving the supply chain networks. And one of the things we did was to come out with the production linked incentive scheme. And the production linked incentive scheme really looks at identifying 10 key areas. And in these 10 key areas, create global champions and become a key manufacturing nation for the world in these areas. Electronics and mobile manufacturing and electronics have been identified, and we've received very, very good response in these areas. So our view is, and our belief is, that India will emerge. We've allocated about 26 billion. This should lead, because it's about 5% of the production that we are giving as a production linked incentive. In 5 years' time, this should lead to $520 billion worth of production in India. And our view is that India must emerge as a global champion in these 10 areas, and global supply chains should logically relocate to India as a consequence of this, particularly in some of the cutting edge areas that we've picked up, like mobile, electronics, battery manufacturing, several of these, automobile, many of these areas. And therefore, this PLI will give a much needed fillip to the country's manufacturing.
Thank you, Amitabh. You mentioned fintech many times, including UPI, and I think it's fairly established that there's not much of a parallel to the backbone that was created in UPI anywhere in the world. Creating an agnostic a platform that connects the entire banking industry and still opening it up for innovation to players, whether it's, you mentioned Phone Pay, Google Pay, WhatsApp Pay was finally launched last year. I'm curious about, would you think about the same kind of a backbone framework for the three sectors that you called out: energy, education, and healthcare? Was there something about financial services that enabled the creation of a pipeline or a platform like UPI that is more difficult in those other three sectors, or is it just a matter of time?
Actually, the key was that financial inclusion was one of the major goals that the government strived to achieve. And actually, this is really was the key. And the journey started with the launch of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana in 2014. And The vision of the government was to ensure universality of access to banking services. Many of us were skeptical about it at that point of time, but as I speak now, nearly 42 crores beneficiary have banked so far, and a total of 135,000 crores, as I said, balance is currently in PMJDY accounts. Now, powered by India's stack and Jam Trinity, Jandan has truly brought to life universal access and equity among a billion plus Indians, with 50% of its account holders being women. Now, the Jam architecture also democratized the access to financial services, and that enabled India to make the leap beyond financial inclusion into financial integration via UPI. India's biggest payment success story, and it has enabled real-time payments, secure payments through bank accounts of an individual, and with provisions like zero balance bank accounts and mobile banking on feature phones. Jandan really provided access to a bouquet of services ranging from credit, insurance, remittance, and pension schemes. The direct benefit transfer reforms, and this has been the key to India's financial inclusion, the direct benefit transfer reform. When I was a young officer, money used to be transferred from central government to state government to districts to villages. And one of our prime ministers then had said that only 15 paisa out of a rupee reaches the poor person. But the DBT reforms powered by UPI's backbone brought in the next phase of inclusion. And actually, this ensured that 100% reaches the actual beneficiary. So DBT has enabled the central government to disburse about 31,000 crores as financial assistance. During the lockdown period, more than 33.25 crores within weeks was disbursed. And then what RBI did was it enabled video KVCI, video know your customer accounts, enabled contactless finance for account opening purposes. So all this, and actually India's lower income groups access to appropriately sized, priced financial products has been increasing at a great scale because of all this. And this is the unique feature of India's fintech revolution.
Thank you. I see a lot of questions coming in, Amitabh, and a lot of it is about how is the government aiding the transformation of digital. I think you spoke about many of it. I have two specific questions that I think would be helpful to double click into. One is around what you mentioned, digital reaching rural areas, the aspirational districts. Are you worried about whether from an access point of view or from these districts being able to fully exploit the power of digital? Are you worried about inequality, or do you feel like the benefits of digital are showing up in those districts as well adequately?
No, I'm not worried at all. In fact, my strong belief is that small shop owners, farmers, traders, MSME entrepreneurs, rural self help groups, the gig economy workers are increasingly generating digital transaction history. And this digital transaction history would be used to inform and build trust with financial institutions. And what will happen is that in the next phase of financial inclusion would be driven through leveraging this data pool, and consent based data sharing would be the key enabler for effectively using this data, the history, and enabling further integration of the marginalized and enable access to a bouquet of formal financial products like credit, insurance, pension, all will flow. All this will flow to the poor people because of the availability of data. The history of and the history will enable us, the history of the digital transaction history will enable us to spread credit, insurance, and pension rather than at the will of the bank manager or the branch managers. All this will be because of data. And therefore, Niti Aayog recently released the Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture. DEPA, which we had recently released, And that will allow Indian citizens to share their financial data securely to help them access the right financial product for themselves. So together with the other layers of India stack, the right DEPA could do for India's data ecosystem what the internet did for communication. And that will really, you will see an explosion of novel products and services that will empower people. So we need to break data silos and monopolies. We'll allow fintech companies to compete on product design, analytics, value creation, and this will be a huge, huge game changer in due course.
Amitabh, we covered this in the last conversation as well, and I've seen you go out of your way to clarify that an Atmanirbhar Bharat doesn't mean an India that is less engaged with the world or less open to investments and capital and energy of companies around the world. A lot of the conversation sometimes gets reduced to an us versus them, whereas the language that I see from you is focused on how do we leverage the power of all stakeholders to make sure India's outcomes are positive. How do you think about it? How do you think about globalization and making sure that India's interests are served while still being a country that remains open to the world and making sure that we leverage all the technical progress that comes from being open to the world?
No, so Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about protectionism. It's about making India an integral part of the global economy. It's about using the domestic market as a springboard for exports. No country in the world post World War II has become rich without penetrating global markets and without opening up its markets. We are great believers in the fact that India must become an integral part of global supply chains, and this would require us to become domestically competitive. You can't become a part of global supply chain without being domestically competitive. The more domestically competitive you are, you will you need to keep yourself a very active player in global economy, and that would require us to constantly interact with the rest of the world. We need constantly to become an integral part of the supply chain, and we need to become a major exporting nation. Without that, it will not be possible for India to grow richer and richer and richer and create wealth for its people over the next 3 decade period. If India is to grow at 9 to 10% over a 3 decade period, it must be open, it must be an integral part of the global economy, it must be an integral part of the global supply chain.
Amitabh, the last question, and we are getting to the end of the session. If you look at April to August 2020, we had one of our largest FDI inflows ever. When you look at some of the growth numbers, the last 6 months has seen explosion of innovation in digital. For all of the fairly ambitious targets that have been set, do you at Niti look at the last 9 and 12 months and what's happening in digital and think maybe we should raise our ambitions even more? Maybe there are other sectors that India should be making a claim on. How are you thinking about this acceleration, and how are you thinking about setting the framework for the next 5 to 10 years, given what's happened in the last year?
So that's a very important question because what COVID has shown to us that every crisis is an opportunity, and it's for us to really tap into that opportunity. We were once, not making masks, we were not making ventilators, we were not making PPE. Today we are exporting them. A great example of all this is the two vaccines that have been made in India. We are the vaccine capital of the world. We make about 70% of the world's vaccines. And similarly, in each one of these areas, whether it's battery storage, whether it's solar manufacturing, whether it's mobile, we need to look at where the world will be 5 years from now and look at those technologies where the world will be 5 years now and get into size and scales of those technologies now for you to really get into the sunrise areas of growth and bring in global manufacturing. Global size and scale is important. To think big and large is important. to get into new technologies is important. Using digital technology to make a quantum jump and a leapfrog will be the key. And I think our ambition, the fact that UPI in 4 years has become bigger than MasterCard, and in the next 3 years will become bigger than Visa, and really demonstrates the fact that if you've got the right platform technologically, you can use the size and strength of your democracy to really make huge innovation reforms. And that is what India needs to do: really disrupt India's economy through the use of technology to make a big jump in the global markets.
Mr. Amitabh Kant, always fabulous talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ajit. Great pleasure. Great pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kant, and thank you, Mr. Ajit, for this wonderful session. We would also like to thank our partners, Reverie Language Technologies, Philosic, CrediWatch, in short, WiseApe, for supporting the 15th IDS. With that, we end this session. Stay tuned for the other sessions. Stay safe. Goodbye.